I understand through my conversation with you in preparation for this event that there was a little bit of creative tension at the beginning in terms of how to approach the reporting part of this story. And it came down to the question of whether Nadja joining migrants in the journey through the Darien Gap, whether her presence there would alter or affect in any way the story.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can we talk about that maybe? Go ahead, Keith.
So, I mean, Nadja and I began to talk about this right away, which is that one of the challenges that Nadja was going to face is a challenge that, foreign correspondents face in all sorts of circumstances, which is if she was going to observe migrants going through the Darien Gap, it wasn't going to be a piece about her, but about the migrants. How would her presence affect their experience? And if she helped a migrant who had hurt themselves, or provided them with a tent, or gave them food, that would actually change their experience. And yet not to do that raises all sorts of horrific ethical issues. So my thought was, which turned out to be completely wrong, and Nadja was completely right, was to borrow from a pretty famous piece 16 years before, or longer than that, 18 years before, by Sonia Nazario at the LA Times called Enrique's Journey, which was quite extraordinary, also a Pulitzer-winning piece, extraordinary story of a young boy who traveled on the terrible train up through Mexico and arrived in the United States. And what Sonia had done was interview Enrique for hours so she could reconstruct his journey. And then afterwards, she took the journey herself under somewhat safer conditions. And that's what I proposed to Nadja, and Nadja can explain why she thought this was not a good idea. And Nadja was completely right.
Nadja, tell us a little bit what their position was on this.
So I think I felt like I wanted to be able to observe the migrants who were going to become protagonists in the story. I wanted to be able to observe them on the journey. And I think I felt concerned that maybe I wouldn't be able to do a great job and a really detailed job if I was only basing the story on reconstruction. I think I also remember, and maybe I hadn't voiced this so strongly to Kit, I think I was also a little bit worried about energy level, because I think that at the start of a reporting trip, you have to be really high energy and you have to maintain it throughout. And I think I was also a little bit concerned that if I first went to Panama and I was trying to, reconstruct this journey that I hadn't yet done, and then started the Darien Gap, it might, I might actually be exhausted by the time I started the Darien Gap trip. And I think I just didn't really have the confidence in a way to be interviewing migrants and trying to select who would be the protagonists in Panama and know what questions to ask them about a journey that I hadn't yet done, and then not really be able to kind of see them in their environment as they experienced part of this journey. What ended up happening was that I didn't, in fact, walk the entire distance with the group of migrants who I focused on, and it ended up being a mix of direct observation and then days of reconstruction.
And another benefit or reward from this approach, Nadja, you mentioned before, that is that maybe the trust that you were able to develop as you became a little bit more legitimate in their eyes, legitimize your presence there by sharing and just going along and facing some of the same dangers and circumstances.
Absolutely. It was so helpful. I did all of the kind of big, long interviews with migrants once they had already left the trail and they were in this migrant camp in Panama, where they were actually, they were forced to wait for security vetting. And it ended up being the perfect place to interview them because they were relaxed at that point. They had finished the trail. They were bored. So they were interested in speaking to a journalist, but because either we had spent a lot of time on the trail, or even if they had met me for the first time, but they knew that I had been on the trail, it was kind of like this automatic street cred. And I think that it gained a lot of legitimacy in their eyes. And we could just have really rich conversations.
So I want to go back to this in a minute, but I wanted to ask Kit, as this trip was being prepared, I'm pretty sure that you were thinking already, anticipating the writing. So is there any piece of advice that you gave Nadja before she left that you think can be helpful to other writers, reporters in similar circumstances?
That's a really good question. And Nadja may have a better memory of this than I. I think one of the things that I said to her, and I've said to other writers, which is that that it's very easy in the moment, particularly when you're doing this kind of deeply observed piece, to forget the kind of random ideas and observations you make, and that you need to have a place, whether it's in your notebook, where you write all of those down, in a kind of a collection of ideas, thoughts, and not to let them pass by, not assume you'll remember them when you're in front of the computer 3 months later. And that those go beyond simply detailing what you're seeing, but your thoughts about what you're seeing. And I think my memory is that I encourage Nadja very much to trust those ideas, and that they would prove really useful and rich later on.
And I'll add something. I remember that, Kit and I think, really agreed on the type of piece that we wanted this to be before I left on this reporting trip. We really wanted to center this piece on the experience of the migrants themselves, and write it as though it was basically over the shoulder of one of them. But Kit just reminded me before I left, just to keep focused on what is this experience like for them? Because obviously it was very, very, even though we were walking in the same places, we were walking in very different positions from very different backgrounds with different resources. And my experience was obviously going to be so different from their experience. And that really became a kind of a North Star for a lot of my reporting, just to always keep in mind, that I want to understand what this journey is like for them. And my reporting really was centered on that question.